I'm a Brazil bull, obviously. I've lived there for 12 years. But but the market's been cheap for a long time, right?
Yep.
So do you think a catalyst is necessary to kick off the bull market? Like is a rate cutting cycle to say a 8 or 9% terminal rate on the Selic and still 5% real yields? Is that going to be enough to really kick off a bull market in Brazilian equities, or is there another catalyst that you think is necessary?
Well, I think ultimately the Brazilian market has traded like a commodity stock for the last couple of years, right? And there are lots of frustrated bulls in commodity equities everywhere, right? There have been selective stories that have worked. But, look at the XME ETF. It's up 10% in the last week, right? People are buying stock in companies that dig stuff out of the ground right now. There is a clear shift in sentiment towards that kind of business. And if we are in a weakening dollar cycle, EM will come back into favor, or international first, but then EM where there's growth coming back. We've got the sentiment surveys turning back up in Brazil. You've got a staggering carrot in terms of valuation. I put a Morgan Stanley chart in my note, which was a regression analysis of price to book versus return on equity. Trailing ROE for Brazil is in the early 20s, right? And it's trading at less than 1.5 times book. Well, on 1.5 times book, right? And there are a lot of stocks that are a lot cheaper than that. You compare that to India, right? The current darling of emerging markets. Yeah. And India's trading ROEs barely into the teens, and it's trading at nearly 4 times book. That looks like a horribly crowded trade to me. And when you just think about how narrow the door is in Brazil, I can see this repeating its trick. I can see Brazil having one of its 20% in dollar terms quarters, which it's done on 20 occasions since 2000.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think people don't talk about how deep the Brazilian markets are. There's a lot of money in Brazil, like you mentioned earlier, but it's just sitting in the overnight rate. So if you start to get the animal spirits going, you start to see a real bull market because foreign equities come in, there's a ton of domestic money that'll pour into equities too.
Listen, I think I can't remember if we talked about this pre you hitting recording or not.
Yeah.
It's always the danger of coming
out.
But, ultimately, I think Brazilian retail investors are amongst the most savvy on the planet, right? And for very good reason. They think about short end, front end fixed income, first, second, and third. And there are also other things like infrastructure bonds and other sort of tax efficient investments that can make fixed income look even more attractive for certain retail investors. At some point, they will come in, particularly when they see the foreigners coming in to chase the equities. Yeah. And, it's not just relative valuation, because relative is, it's a mean reversion trade, relative valuation. But in absolute terms, Brazilian stocks are trading well below long-term averages on a price to sales, on an EV/EBITDA, on a price to earnings, price to book basis. It's well below the average, and no one has been in the trade. One of the things that I like to look at is to look at the shares outstanding in country ETFs to see, you just take the price out of the equation. You just look at which ETFs have been accumulating assets under management on, and look at it and analyze it on a share basis. And essentially, a ton of money left Brazil at COVID, and it hasn't come back, right?
Yeah.
And, to my mind, it's just a matter of time. And I don't know to what extent you lean on technical analysis, but if I look at a weekly chart of EWZ as a proxy, right, it looks like, it has broken out. It's broken out of that downtrend in the last few